Okay, we are live now.
Awesome.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Claire.
Scott, maybe we should wait for like a full minute after or so, so everyone who kind of jumps in right at 8 can be in on it.
Yes, sounds good. All right, we'll probably go ahead and get started here. Hello everyone, my name is Scott Feehan. I'm a PhD student at the University of Nevada, and on behalf of the rest of the organizing committee, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for a part of our EPSP Connects seminar series. Before we get into our discussion today, I just want to remind you of upcoming events. On May 19th, we have a science talk from Dr. Marissa Palusis, and on May 26th, we have a special town hall regarding the surface processes, applications of environmental seismology, and distributed acoustic sensing. It's going to be a Q&A with another panel discussion. So we'd like to remind you to join us for those discussions. And as always, these events will be recorded and posted to our webpage. And so we can go ahead and get started with our event today.
Cool, thanks, Scott. So today we're going to be doing a panel discussion on how to build a supportive research community. I'm Joel Scheingross. I'm an assistant professor at University of Nevada, Reno, and together with Scott, I'll be helping moderate this. And we're going to be talking about aspects of building a supportive research community, both in relation to the science that all of us do, as well as issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's my great pleasure today to introduce 4 panelists who are going to be walking us through this. And they are Julia Cisneros and Jorge San Juan Blanco, who both just finished and defended their PhDs at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So kudos to both of them. And they're going to be sharing with us some work they've been doing at UIUC with the GeoHydro discussion group that they've started there, which has been a nice way that they've built an aspect of their own research community there. And I also want to thank Julia and Jorge for kind of giving the motivation to put this together. We'll also have Katie Barnhart, who is at the USGS as a research scientist, and Katie is going to be talking about work she's led, kind of bringing people together from across different institutions who share methods in common. Katie's been doing this through the LandLab software and also with the Journal of Open Source Software. And finally, we'll have Rachel Maxwell, who is a PhD student at UC Santa Cruz, who's been instrumental in the UC Santa Cruz Geodes program, which does a whole range of things within the UCSC Earth Sciences Department, focused on building supportive communities with more of a diversity, equity, and inclusion effort. So the first thing I want to do is actually let all of the panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about the efforts that you've been involved in and how you've seen that allow for building a supportive research community. So Julia and Jorge, let's start with you.
Great, thank you for having us. Jorge and I agreed that I could be the one to start off, and Jorge, jump in if you have anything additional to say. So today we're going to talk about our participation in leading the GeoHydro discussion group. So GeoHydro discussion group bridges students from geology, geography, and hydro departments at the U of I who all study things related to water, so that we could have a safe and comfortable atmosphere to discuss our research, to gain informal feedback, but also to gain peer mentorship. So that's sort of how we started off. And it turns out when you have a group of awesome people, you also become awesome friends with them. And then those relationships sort of kind of sustain throughout your career. So Jorge and I led the group for about 4 years, and now it's being continued by new graduate students. But the original people of the group, we still hang out and talk, and we had a Zoom chat just a few months ago. So it's been really great.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think just Julia just explained it very, very clearly. So I don't have anything else to add about the description of our effort.
Okay, great. Let's go with Rachel next and hear a little bit more about the work you've been doing with geodes.
All right, thank you for inviting me. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel. I use she, her pronouns. As Joel said, I'm a PhD student at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and I am a part of GEODES, which stands for Geoscientists Encouraging Openness and Diversity in the Earth Sciences. And our goal is we're a group of graduate students that host events for the department on themes of building community, providing professional development opportunities, and raising awareness of DEI issues. GEODES was started like about a year or two before I arrived, and I just sort of jumped right in, wanting to be a part of it. I'm not sure how much more of a description you want and how much I'll say during the Q&A, but.
I mean, if you want to, maybe it would be good just to give a couple of examples of things that GEODES does, so people can get a sense of how you've been able to build that community.
Yeah, so we host quarterly, we're on the quarter system, so we host quarterly events just sort of as a social place for members of the department to get together and know each other, talk without all of the science lingo behind it. We hold workshops such as how to work against microaggressions, how to know what they are, recognize them, and intervene if that's a thing that you're able to do in the moment. And then even things like, what is the qualifying exam like? You know, for folks who really understand the graduate school experience, they're not so worried about it. But if you are maybe a first-gen student, first-gen college student, or your advisor just isn't as supportive as other advisors are, we host these events to kind of level the playing field for everyone, make sure that everyone knows what's happening, and really supporting our graduate students.
Yeah, so kind of really making sure everyone knows about the hidden curriculum and keeping everyone on the same page. Great, thanks, Rachel. So our next panelist is Katie Barnhart. Katie, can you tell us a bit about how you've been building communities through Land Lab and with the Journal of Open Source Software?
Definitely. And I'm just pasting into the chat to all panelists and attendees the links to JOSS, the Journal of Open Source Software, and also Land Lab. It's the documentation page of Land Lab. So I think there are sort of two efforts I've been involved in, Land Lab and JOSS, and they're a little bit different, but they sort of both are examples of building community around open source software and open source software collaboration principles. So I'll describe each of them in a little bit and try to sort of put them together in a meaningful way. So many of you may know about Land Lab, but for those who don't, it's a Python package that can be used for building 2D models in Earth surface processes. And so it has a bunch of core pieces that create a model grid and have physical process components. And most of this sort of core development of Land Lab has been NSF funded, but the design of the project was that, you know, the funding would be really for the main core, but once that core is there, individuals can contribute their own. So rather than say writing a one-off, you know, many thousand line MATLAB or Python script for your PhD like I did, you might, you know, implement your ideas as a component. Inside the Land Lab framework, you can take advantage of the things that have already been created, and you can get support on sort of best practices from the Land Lab core developer community. A lot of the interaction that we have is either through in-person or now online trainings. There have been a number of recorded webinars, but then also through GitHub issues. And that's the thing we'll come back to with respect to JOS. A lot of the interaction happens on GitHub. It happens through the sort of principles of making an issue to describe a need or a problem, and then discussing either with your, you know, discussing or leaving notes for yourself in that issue, discussing with other users, creating a pull request that changes the code or adds something, and then ultimately that sort of goes into the main repository that everyone can use. And so the role of the core developers, folks like me and Greg Tucker, Nicole Gasparini, Eric Hutton, Erkan Estambagulu, you know, our role is to help maintain the package as well as support new users if they are interested in contributing or using. And there's sort of a wide range that people can contribute. I think a thing that I struggled with when I started working on open source software is really feeling like I needed to do a big thing in order to have a meaningful contribution. But it really is true that even the smallest, you know, pointing out that something is, pointing out that documentation isn't clear, finding a bug, having an idea, all of those contributions are really valuable, valued, and welcome. So the other sort of effort that I've been involved in, JOS is a journal that is focused on research software. So what is reviewed is in fact just, it is the software and its documentation, its ability to be used. The entire process of review and finding reviewers happens on GitHub through GitHub issues. Our editorial process is transparent and on sort of a typical software documentation style web page. So, you know, for example, if there are places where we need to refine how we make decisions, what our expectations are, those things happen fully transparently through a typical issue pull request type process. And I think a thing that I really value about JOS is that its stated goal is to improve research software and to give people credit for creating reusable software. The other thing that I've really valued about the way that JOS approaches its role in this space is that it's very accommodating in terms of recognizing that, you know, people have other limitations on their time. It sort of allows editors to be very, very honest about what their availability is and isn't. We actually fully shut down accepting articles for a couple of months at the beginning of COVID, recognizing that, you know, that sort of space that was difficult. Continuing being editors was difficult for many people. And so I think one thing I've been really impressed by others in this community is recognizing, when some amount of time is too much, and that sort of doing this work, it does take time.
Great, thanks, Katie. And thanks again to all our panelists for being here. So we have a couple of questions that Scott and I are going to ask the panelists before we open up to Q&A from the audience. But if you have a question, there should be time towards the end. So please drop that into the Q&A and we will try to get through as many of those as we can. Scott, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Joel. I'll go ahead and direct this first one to Julia and Rachel. And the question is, what do you think are some of the best first steps students, postdocs, and faculty can take to build supportive research communities within their groups, departments, and universities?
I can start off. I think about this a lot because I was a graduate student when we created GeoHydro, and now I'm a postdoc. And so I think to build a supportive research community, there are a few key ingredients. I think those are to offer several opportunities for informal feedback, discussion, and for mentorship. So I think in terms of mentorship, I'm not a faculty member, but I think if you are a faculty member, from my perspective as a graduate student, when I did this, I think you have to realize that you are not the one and only mentor your student needs. And you need to find other mentors that can help your mentee develop in ways that you are not suitable to mentor for. And so I think that is a really key thing, that if we all remember that we are not the one and only thing that a person needs, and we try to actively find people who can support somebody, that is going to create a supportive system, because it shows that we're all in it together. We're all trying to help people together. It's a collective. But the last thing that I think is important is that, we need to actively fight for justice and create spaces where students feel safe, where they feel like they belong, and where they will not be harmed. If we cannot do that, then we're never going to have a supportive environment in any case, at least a supportive environment for everybody. So that's sort of what I think needs to happen.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Julia just said. Yeah, I guess the first step that I would suggest taking is, if there is something that you feel like is lacking, ask around and, ask other graduate students, like, hey, I really want this kind of professional development opportunity. Do you know if there's anything available? Oh, there's not. What can we do? How can we prepare ourselves? And then talking to any professors or members of the department who have some authority to do that kind of thing. And, usually everyone's really busy and they can't provide that for you. So then asking, okay, is it okay if I provide this thing? I and a couple other graduate students are interested in doing this, and seeing what sort of support they're able to lend. Our department offers, I think it's $1,000 a year for programming. So that's like ordering pizza to get people to show up, because sometimes that's a really useful way to get people to come to your events. Or we hosted a viewing of the documentary Picture a Scientist. That takes money. And so any financial support that the department has, or that you can get from donations, all of that is really helpful. And so just finding out where the resources are and how you can take advantage of them. And then also sort of echoing what Julia said, making sure that it's not just you doing something when you're alone in a fight for getting this opportunity or raising this awareness. It's really exhausting. So finding other people who are like-minded and are also willing to help, I think, is really, really key.
That's great. And Jorge and Katie, feel free to jump on if you have any thoughts. But I guess just a quick follow-up question from me would be, you talked a lot about the student side and then the faculty side and what they can do. What about this postdoc? Julia, I know you're newly a postdoc, but this middle ground of they aren't quite a student, they aren't quite a faculty. Have you seen them fall on the mentor side? or the I need a little more support side? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have been thinking about that a lot. And I think as a postdoc, the way that I feel my role is going to be changing and the way that I'm trying to move towards is I can be a mentor for a lot of students because I have, experienced a lot of the things that that's newly happening with them. But I can also act as a bridge between students and faculty. Sometimes it's difficult to communicate things. Sometimes it's difficult to know where to ask for help, to know where support is, and maybe as a postdoc, you're going into a new institution, but you've gone through some of those things before. You know where to ask for support, what resources generally are available, and you can help, students who are trying to create new initiatives. You can help them navigate that. You can support them. You can offer labor because you've done it already. So you probably have a lot of that experience and probably a lot of like little things like, how do I write an email? You can do that you can help them with those things, but also you can sort of see where the gaps are and you can start to offer some opportunities to fill some of those gaps. You can talk to faculty members, say, hey, you know what? I noticed that there's this thing that doesn't exist, but I think it would be really helpful. Can we do that together? Because I think at the end of the day, when you get people at the top to start to do things, everybody else is going to benefit from that. And so as a postdoc, that's how I'm going to try to sort of bridge the two across, and hopefully I will learn a lot in that process as well. Maybe I can talk about that in a year or two.
I also have a follow-up question inspired by some of the things that Julia and Rachel said, which is I'm curious if there are ways in which the groups you're part of have changed in the times that you have been part of them, and sort of how that change came about. Was it sort of a slow drift, or were there, we've experienced a lot of precipitating moments for social justice in the last year. So I can imagine that is a place where, change might have come from, but I'm curious about how your organizations have changed and what that process was like.
Yeah, our group has definitely changed a little bit. We still do all of the three key themes that we're working on, which is building community, professional development, and raising awareness. But I've noticed, I've been a graduate student at Santa Cruz for 5 years now. And so when I first started, it was definitely about, okay, let's raise awareness that some of these issues are here. And then now we're starting to have things like, okay, what can I do about these things? Because we noticed that a lot of the questions that our participants had were, okay, great, now I know that microaggressions exist. What can I do to combat these things? And so we've sort of moved from having in-house developed workshops to inviting, for example, the campus diversity officer, like someone who's a lot more knowledgeable than we are, to come and provide this programming for us. And so we're really more facilitators now rather than developing it ourselves.
Yeah, I think thinking about how it's changed, I will say that Jorge and I have stepped away from leading GeoHydro, so it's been led by a new group over the last year, and so they've been online and things like that. But recently we've talked about a lot of those things. We got together with a group of some of the members that have been joining a lot over the past 4 years. And I think for me, the thing that has changed in all of us is acknowledging what we created and why we created it. For a while, we created a group that was going to support us. It turns out that us are a lot of minoritized students that just sort of came together and created a safe place where we could talk about our research and just make friends and have a place where we felt like we belonged. After 4 years of doing that, it turns out that when you create a really awesome place and a place where people feel like they belong, a lot more people who need that join. And so we accidentally, but not really accidentally, because it was informed from our perspectives, we created a really great place for minoritized, underrepresented students students from, who are first generation to come and learn these things, the hidden curriculums, gain mentorship, gain friends, talk about things that they don't feel comfortable talking about in predominantly white institutions. We sort of had this bubble. Now, after this year of this enlightenment, we sort of thought back and realized, like, yeah, that's what we were doing. We were creating a place where we felt we could be ourselves. And it took all of this, this past year to really come to terms with the fact that we created it because we sort of needed it and it didn't exist at the time. So I think that like awareness has changed, but nothing else really has changed. We just continued doing what we were doing, was creating this, really awesome space for each other.
Yeah, so I think the message is coming through loud and clear that really to have a supportive research community and to do good science, we need to have safe places where people feel like they're comfortable and they can express their views and be respected. I want to move on from that and ask, if you are in a community where you feel like you have that safe place and you are respected, then how does one think about actually starting to make successful research collaborations and build networking? And I also, there's a lot of early career folks on this panel. I wonder if you think there's any misconceptions that graduate students or early career folks in general have about how to build their network, or that you might have had that you've learned were maybe limiting your potential. So I'm going to direct this to Katie and Jorge. So just kind of, once we have that safe place, how do we actually build this research community, start collaborations at your university, at other universities, and what were kind of mistakes you learned along the way, or kind of false, misconceptions you think people might have?
I can start off here. That's a very good point that you're bringing that up, because I think one thing, of course, is starting up, and the other thing is sustaining it. And one of the main themes that I could recognize from our experience is that very organically we were able to create these atmospheres of friendliness. I mean, I was able to see how one of the first actions that we took was reaching out to other students, because all of our hydro geo discussion group started as a conversation in a hall. All that idea started like talking in a hall, saying, hey, we realize that we are working about very similar topics from different perspectives, coming from different departments. But at the end of the day, we can benefit from just talking about it, from discussing, like going through certain issues in our research that probably we can gain from someone else's perspective. That everything started from that point, but everything started very casual, very informal. And I think that was one of the main things that we had in our research, in our geohydro discussion group, was that kind of like informality. And one thing led to the other, in the sense like the students started just to invite other students. I mean, from our research group, we were able to say, you know what, they are doing this. Why don't we just stop by and just see what they are doing and just talk? And reaching out and being open is, I think, it's another very important step here, because we're creating this friendly atmosphere and very casual atmosphere. At some point, we're just bringing our lunch and having a discussion. Somebody was just presenting a figure and say, I don't know what this data is telling me. I just need some help, literally, something like that. And it was a very like safe space to just being open to talk and be open to think, to say what we're thinking about, and talking about and it connects a little bit with what misconceptions we might have as an early career or even as a grad student, is that we think that we are alone. We think that we are going through certain struggles in our research by ourselves, and we think that's uncommon, that everyone has everything figured it out. And I don't know if through this experience we learned that that's not the case. In one of these conversations that we had with the former leaders of the group, that was one of the first things that he mentioned. It's like, I thought that I was alone, that I was just struggling all by myself, but he realized that we all been there. And it was a nice exercise to acknowledge that we are all like trying still to figure it out, our research. But this is so nice that we like kind of like created this friendly atmosphere where we can reach to other peers, to other grad students that are going through similar experiences, and we can also share and share our perspectives in the same way.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jorge. I've definitely, I remember as a grad student and even now as the professor, feeling that type of imposter syndrome, and that it is nice talking to people and knowing everyone's doing the same thing and we're going through the same thing. Katie, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks for kicking us off on that, Jorge. That was really interesting. I have a couple of thoughts, but the first thought is that, among the participants in an effort, I feel like there's a lot of value in finding the sort of common goals that you have in sustaining what you're doing. I also want to acknowledge that the sort of two efforts that I'm a part of don't have a sort of social justice component and I think, and so it's less likely that this effort the efforts I'm thinking about and have a lot of experience with that I'm representing here today are going to run into like administrative or hierarchical differences in what the common goals are. So I just want to recognize that is the case, and that is probably reflected in some of my thoughts. Though, to the best of our ability, Joss has a stated goal of diversifying our editorial board that I think it's been reasonably successful. In addition to funding common goals, I think there's another piece, which is making sure that there are ways to give people credit for what they do. And I think holding a panel like this and recognizing folks as contributing to community in a meaningful way is one of many ways that credit can exist. To some extent, I think JOS exists because there is a recognition that there's a lot of time and effort that goes into reusable software for research, and that sort of what the standards of research software are different than more traditional commercial open source software, and that a publication is a particular unit that is meaningful among certain counters of things, and such sort of aligning that countable unit with a process that actually does improve the software was a good way to sort of approach this effort. The other thing is that I think it's important to be, especially in the sort of sustaining times of these efforts. I think often early on, it's sort of very organic, or there's a lot of momentum and excitement, and you're excited to like put in a lot of time. But I think in the sort of longer term, it's important to really recognize that this is work and it takes time, and sometimes an individual has that time and sometimes they don't, and to create opportunities for people to say like, yeah, I can't take quite as much right now. The final piece that I've learned from my experience at JOS and with LandLab is that I think that we often really like to finish everything really well, perfectly maybe, or, but I think it's important to remind ourselves that not everything needs to be finished perfectly. It's important to, I think there's nothing wrong with starting a bunch of things, but it's really worthwhile to reduce the number of things that one actually takes all the way across the finish line. Because I think, as many of us know from work in our research, the number of things that you finish is much smaller than sort of what you hope. And I think in this sort of community effort, a similar principle applies, that it's better to do a relatively constrained thing really well to solidify that, and to be okay with sort of not doing everything to that same level.
Great. Julia, it looks like you wanted to chime in with some thoughts.
Yeah, I wanted to say, thinking about like common misconceptions, but then how to sustain things. I think another common misconception for graduate students is that your mentor is somebody who is like your advisor or this or that, somebody who's higher than you. But there is so much value to peer mentorship. And I think that's something that you don't learn until later, that, you can mentor your friend in some things that you know how to do or that you've experienced, and then vice versa. And so when I think about how we use that to sustain the group, I started the group with Roberto Fernandez in hydro and Quinn Lewis in geography. That's why we all came together as, these three departments. And they were older than me. They're, towards the end of their graduate career, and they mentored me on like, how do you start a group? How do you create these synergies? But then right after that, so we all sort of shared that labor together every week. Quinn would send the email, Roberto would send the email, I would send the email. But I had 2 weeks to learn how to send the email first. But then after that, when they graduated, I needed somebody else to help me. And of course, I jumped to Jorge because he's one of my good friends. And I was like, hey, Jorge, can you help me? So then we were able to share that labor together, as a group, to just 2 of us that time. And then we did that back and forth for 4 years. And for a little bit, Jorge helped me learn a little bit more about how to navigate hydro and the way that they send emails and things like that. And we were able to like figure out how to book rooms together, but we supported each other and we helped each other the whole way through. And so I think that's something that sometimes we don't realize, is that, you can support each other in different ways. And a lot of that comes from peer mentorship, but then also sustaining something means that, you support each other in other ways, like taking labor, joining together. When I think about how we've now sustained it even further, now that Jorge and I are leaving, one of the big things that happened was we brought in students who we thought would really benefit, and they thought, wow, this is amazing. Can you show me how to do this? And then we started mentoring them on, here's how you take over. And now they're able to take it over, and they're able to do all the things that we sort of guided them on in that last year. So I think that's a really important thing to remember. And I think sometimes we don't realize it until maybe after we've done it, that, peer mentorship is very important. And we should always remember that it's valuable.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that I agree with everything you've just said. And one thing that I really like that Joss has implemented is we have a sort of a peer mentor buddy that we are assigned if you join the editorial board. So it's someone who's willing to sort of be the person to ask, how do I do this? How do I handle this? Type questions, more or less until you feel like you don't have them anymore. And then, a few, months later, you may become a peer mentor yourself. The thing I really value about that is that I think it's a situation in which you really appreciate how you learn a lot by being on both sides of a peer mentorship experience. I feel like I learned a lot from interacting with each of the people who I had the pleasure of being the senior peer mentor for.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, if you want to go out and start doing building some collaborations. You have really a multitude of options. And remember, you're not alone. You can start things informally over coffee with friends. You can, be part of things that are a bit more formal, like JOS and Land Lab. But just kind of remember, you're not alone. Talk to your peers and find ways that works with you. And as long as we have this kind of safe space, then it's really going out and talking to people can really create synergies. Great. So I want to push it over. Oh, it looks like we have some questions in the chat. So should we so sorry, I'm going through the chat now. So I'm going to go with one question that talking about mentorship. And I think we've touched on this a little bit, but how formal are these mentorships, and how do you deal with having kind of informal talks versus organized schedule meetings, and what works for you in this boundary between kind of formal and informal, and how do you find that balance?
I can go ahead and answer this one, at least from our experience. In terms of how informal, one of the first thing is the casual format really worked for us. I think the main reason it was because it was led by students initially, and one of the comparisons that I always think when I think about it is like a research meeting with your research group. It sometimes might be very structured, and you're meeting with your advisor, and you're kind of like presenting what you're doing, and you want to show that you're doing a good job, and you want to somehow, even if you want to, but you somehow feels pressured to deliver, to show the good job that you're doing. So that will add a little bit more to that dynamic, to the interaction within a research group. And it has a value by itself. I'm not saying that it's not valuable at all. But what I want to point out here, making just this comparison, is that when we started to have these informal discussions, people came relaxed. People were able to actually like talk in a relaxed way and be open and realizing how much they have to offer in the same way, talking about the peer mentorship. Because that's one of the things, sometimes we just close up and say, well, I don't have too much to say about this topic or that topic, but you will surprise how much you can share to another peer about the work that they're doing just from your own perspective. And the way how we manage the groups were that we have a weekly meeting, and we set up a Google form or a Google sheet where we share it weekly. So if people wanted to share some of their material that I want to share with the group to discuss, they were open to do it. But one of the main thing is like we were even open to, as I mentioned before, like if you were having trouble with a figure that you didn't know sense of the data, literally that was one of the discussions of that week. Okay, I have this figure and I don't know, this is kind of like the context. I need some help with this. At some point, I remember it was this discussion that one of our members had a job talk. He just wanted to practice a little bit of job talk and get some feedback to see from the student perspective, what do they think about it? And without intention, it was so helpful because we now knew how a job talk would look like from being a PhD student, how it looked like, because this was of course a senior PhD student about to finish, and he was in that transition. And we gain a lot of things from those experiences, from those values, and I think in a very relaxed way we're able to with the structure. And I think also having an open conversation, an open communication is fundamental. It's fundamental because the truth is that we discussed at the very beginning, the group as a group will evolve, and we have to adjust to the situation that we are in at that time. For example, at some point towards the end of the term of the semester, time was tight. So we didn't have much time to meet like for a full hour or for 30 minutes. Sometimes it was a little bit hard to find that space. During the pandemic, talking to one of the leaders of the group right now, it's been hard for them also to kind of to still keep in contact with people and trying to keep the connections, because in the pandemic we're isolated, we're kind of like tired to the virtual interaction, and it was a little bit harder for them at the very beginning, but they've been able to adjust to see what was the need of the group to keep providing that space for the members. And yeah, that's what I have to say about this question.
Yeah, I would just add that in terms of like mentorship and formality and things, for our group, the most formal part of it is that we meet on this day at this time every week. Within that meeting, we know we have a room and we know that people are going to show up. So within that time, everything is flexible. If you sign up as the person, like if I sign up on that date, all I'm saying is that this is a date where I'm going to ask of the group to support me. If that's because I'm going to give a talk, if that's because I need help with a figure, a presentation, if I just want to like talk about my CV, I know that I have that hour, I'm going to put it up on the board or something, and everybody is going to support me and help me. So within that time, whatever happens within that time is informal, and it's completely up to the person who has taken that time for themselves that week. That's sort of like the unknown or unsaid thing that we've all decided on, that, you know, if you take that time, it's for you, and we're all going to sit there and support you, so that the next time, if somebody else needs that, they're going to get that support as well. And so in terms of mentorship, I think that's kind of how we're able to balance the informal with the formal. The formal is that we all know we're going to show up. The informal is it's however you need it that week.
Great. Any other final thoughts on this, for this formal versus informal? Scott, I'll throw it back to you for the next question.
Awesome. So yeah, we can open it up to Q&A to the attendants or the attendees if you want to throw a question up in the chat. But in the meantime, we've talked a lot about peer-to-peer mentorship, but taking a step beyond that and going to more senior members. So what would be some advice into how you approach more senior members and try to get their support? Or were there things that more senior members could have done to support you more? And I'll open this up to everyone.
I can start if no one else wants to. I have learned to be pretty direct when asking senior members for help. I try to, I don't know if this is like out of my sense of courtesy or out of my sense of, oh, I don't want to like take up too much of your time, but I do try to ask like, hey, can I ask you for career advice the next time we meet, just so that they know like, okay, this is thing that I want help on. And generally, because I don't know what questions to ask, because these are things that I don't have experience with, just like letting them know, like, this is the topic I really want to talk to you about and I need help with, that lets them know, okay, let me like bring you some things that I think will be useful for you. I think that ability to ask for help is really difficult. It takes a lot of practice. And so I guess my piece of advice for that, but also what I wish more senior members would do, is find people that you feel comfortable asking for those things. And what I would like for more senior members is them making it clear, I am open, I'm here to talk to you if that's something that you want. I think it's a little bit easier with younger faculty than with older faculty. Postdocs are also usually a lot more willing to talk to me. But it does take practice, and I know it's hard, but it gets easier the more you practice it.
I'll jump in with some perspectives from Joss and LandLab. And I think one thing that I'll say here that's a little bit different. Oh, and we have a new joiner. And so in the case of Joss, I think it's a little unique in that the group is inherently a mixture of, quite senior faculty members. And we recently had someone ask, is it a requirement to have a PhD to be an editorial board member? And the answer is no. It's, you're judged in that sense on your sort of contributions in this space and your suitability. And I think one thing that often happens is that we take papers from all across all of science. So our sort of executive editors don't span all of science. And so there's a recognition that they need to rely on others who have either expertise in a particular topical domain or expertise in a particular language. And I think that sort of inherently forces us to stay humble. I think that the main lesson I would take here from both sides is sort of a stay humble. As a student, you don't know very much about the time constraints that are placed on senior students, faculty members, postdocs. As a faculty member or a senior researcher, you may not know what the experience of a student is. And in particular, if you're, say in my case, if you're a white woman, you might not know what the experience of a BIPOC individual in your workplace is. And so I think in the case of the open source software land, it's very much a content stay humble. But I think the broader message, is to really recognize where you have a strength and where you need to learn from others.
Great, thank you both so much. It's getting a lot of know your blind spots, know how to get people to help you with those blind spots, and just being a more collaborative in every discipline, science or otherwise.
Great. So I'm going to pose one more question, and if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, we can do some final comments after this. But, I guess one of the things that I'm hearing, thinking about kind of building these communities at the places where we work, is that it seems like it's a lot easier when you already have a geodes program and you need to sustain it, or you already have some type of discussion group. I guess, what advice do you have to people who are just in a situation where they feel like, gosh, I don't have this. It's not something, I can't transform this overnight. I can't build this on my own. What are the first steps you think someone can actually take to be like, I want to start building a supportive research community at my university, or, you know what, I feel like my university is so toxic. I want to reach out on, the internet to other places. Like, what advice would you give to someone just trying to navigate that? And this can be open to anyone who wants to answer.
I can answer that. I think there are several different avenues you can take. I think if you have a few people, maybe you've taken courses outside of your department, and maybe you have found that, you connect really well to them, hold on to them, support them, and ask them for the support that you need. If you don't have that, or if you just cannot even handle thinking about how to create that in your place, find outside places. If you've been thinking about it, if you're up to it, if it's something that you think you can handle, join Twitter. try to find groups that are outside of your university. I found Geo-Latinas through Twitter, and it has been transformational for me. I think groups like that, rely on these international, virtual spaces to build community are very beneficial. Geo-Latinas is a member-driven circular organization with the idea and the goal of promoting, inspiring, and supporting Latinas in earth and space sciences. It's largely driven through online membership, through virtual spaces, through, we have a Slack channel, we meet on Zoom a lot. We were meeting on Zoom way before anything like a pandemic happened. So we were Zoom superstars by that time. That was something that really helped me and really supported me during a time when I was dealing with a lot of things, a lot of biases and stuff like that. Especially during the pandemic where I was kind of isolated and didn't feel like I had anybody. Geo-Latinas became a really important part in my life. So I think if you have a need for that, please seek that out. I mean, if you can't find anything, you're always welcome to join Geo-Latinas as long as you, believe in our goals and believe in our message. We're more than happy to support you. If you have talked to people in your department or in other departments and like Jorge said, in the hallways, and you sort of see like, hey, there's something that we could all build together, do it. Schedule a room if you can. That's how we started. We just scheduled a meeting room for 1 hour and we just got together and we said, this is what I need. This is what I need. What do you need? How can we support each other? I think one of the biggest things is if a group like that doesn't exist, it's not on you to create it. But if you have the ability to, if you think that you can, find other people who believe in that too, who want to do the same, and try to do something together, try to build something together. Even if it just means that you go out to lunch once a week, that's something that's going to be helpful to you. I know that sometimes as a graduate student, it's difficult. And even if you're not a graduate student, especially if you're a minoritized person and you're in a predominantly white institution, it's very hard to find somewhere where you belong. So I encourage you to recognize, to know that you're not alone, find people that can support you, reach out and, join Twitter. It's awesome. So I think that's kind of my advice.
I guess I'll add something sort of along the slightly different dimension that I'm representing here, which is, that I think oftentimes we end up, we may feel like the work we're doing, there aren't as many people at our institution who maybe do exactly what we do. And so one thing that I think is quite nice about the more or less fully online collaborative open source software efforts is that it is a way to connect and to share expertise and to sort of request help beyond people at your institution. I know that we, for example, we often get questions as GitHub issues or sometimes as emails about Land Lab. A student, typically a student has a question about how to use something or how to modify something. And so one thing that's sort of nice about fully living in that online collaborative space on GitHub is that it means that an Italian student, a Brazilian student, can engage with the core developers, can and can, if appropriate, contribute, but most importantly, sort of just get their foot in the door, and that the sort of possibility of getting your foot in the door is not limited to just having been to a conference in person or having your advisor know someone else's advisor. So I think one thing that is really, I think, special about this sort of online collaborative open source software space is that especially with good community guidelines for interactions, it can make participation more accessible.
Yeah, like to add one quick experience, like it actually follows along with what Katie and Julie said. Like finding these virtual platform, virtual spaces, you can, it might be a little bit easier right now because we are realizing that it's not as scary as before. And I want to share the experience of Dr. Lugo Velez from Eastern Illinois University. She's as a Puerto Rican, she started to notice that Puerto Ricans researchers didn't have much of visibility, even between them as a group. So she, recognizing that void, she started like the research, virtual research talks where they meet monthly. And initially it started the Puerto Rican Association within UIUC, but it was able, because of the virtual setup, was able to even across departments and across institutions up to now in meeting monthly, what they similar. And I could relate it a little bit with the geohydro discussion group, because they just meet quickly for 15 to 30 minutes. They just have the floor to talk about what you're doing in a very simple way. And what is nice about this specific experience that they've been having is, like, first they have more visibility, and it's not always limited to Puerto Ricans. It's open to everybody, but it's just a way to start to kick off the ball rolling. And they've been able to do that in a very simple way, because it's across departments, it's across disciplines, and also it's across institutions. So it's a very nice opportunity for researchers within all disciplines to communicate their research, the science, whatever they're doing at a time. So it's a very nice setup as well. And it just as an example of how you can also reach out when you see that there is something lacking. Sometimes you just need a little bit of courage, because you might be a little bit scared at the beginning, but I think it's absolutely worth trying to create these spaces if you already recognize that it's lacking.
Awesome, thanks, Jorge. Rachel, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I would really just echo what everyone has been saying so far. Excuse me. Yeah, finding your resources, knowing what's available, whether it's at your institution or not. One thing that I guess I'll just give a quick plug for, because I don't think I've heard it mentioned yet, is URGE, Unlearning Racism in the Geosciences. That's a national program. I think it's NSF funded. That has been really useful for my group in terms of, okay, how do we make our spaces more welcoming to BIPOC students or BIPOC faculty or postdocs, any level? Because that's something that we at our home institution don't really have a lot of knowledge of. And so reaching out to those national level resources has been really helpful for us.
Great. Well, it's already past 9 o'clock, so I want to just thank all our panelists for coming on again today. And I think this has been a really good discussion with lots of great tips that we can all take back in our own lives to try to build more supportive communities. So thank you all so much for joining, and thanks to our attendees for tuning in.
Thank you so much for having us.
I also want to say, stay tuned. Jorge and I are writing a blog about our experience and what we've learned from the GeoHydro group. So stay tuned. We're going to hopefully send that out soon.
Yeah, and we'll go ahead and we can get that posted on the AGU EPSP website.
Great. Thank you all for doing this.